Okay, in this video, I'm going to read you chapter 8, which I wish I would have noticed on the last video that it's only a couple pages. So we are going to see chapter 8 and chapter 9 in this recording. So it's going to be a little bit of a long one, so get yourself settled. And once again, we are in my backyard. If you listen really carefully, you can hear the wind. And they're quiet now, but there were some frogs. That was fun. So welcome to my outdoor classroom, so to speak. We are on chapter 8, and it's called Home Sweet Home. Bubbles rose in front of the submarine's window. A rumbling sound broke through Basil's reverie. And that's the last thing I remember before waking up in my bed, Basil said. Perhaps there's some hope for Von Rotwell yet, Professor McGuckin replied with tentative optimism. I'm not so sure. Basil remained glum. I think he had plans to destroy Monkey Island. McGuckin's submarine was now approaching the tube below the island. Hang on, laddie, we're going in. Faster and faster they spun. Then with a whoosh, they broke the surface. Basil looked out the window in astonishment. They were floating in the middle of the lagoon. So if you're confused, remember Basil had gone back home at the end of the last chapter. Von Rotweil was the one who dropped him off. And that's where we started our story, where Basil's mom thought maybe he had run off. And then he was returned back, and then he immediately left to go with Professor McGuckin. So there's a little bit of a timeline play going on here. Professor McGuckin opened the hatch. The first thing Basil noticed was the quiet. The monkeys had disappeared. What had happened? Von Rotweil's temple was now a small mountain of rubble. Where is everyone? Basil asked. The professor pulled out a telescope. Aha! His face lit up in a smile. There, he said, pointing at the secret entrance to the volcano. He handed the telescope to Basil. Professor, he cried, I see Louise. What do you think is going on? As he watched, dozens of monkeys went in and out of the entrance. Slowly, the submarine chugged to the shoreline. There's only one way to find out. The professor opened the hatch door, and the ladder slowly unfolded. Basil bolted onto dry land, racing toward Louise and the others. A sudden shadow made him skid to a stop. Professor, the owls, he cried, and crouched behind a boulder. But the shadow was only a passing cloud. Where are they? He asked. By now the professor had reached the boulder. Come on, laddie, he said in a jovial baritone. Let's go see. Chapter 9, Moving Shadows. They didn't have to go far to get the answers. Their arrival was spotted, and running down the path was Rathbone. Louise raced past him and leaped into the professor's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Basil stood still, but he was grinning. Louise jumped over and hugged him, kissing him on the cheek. See, I knew you could do it. Basil's face turned beet red. He had never been hugged by a girl before, much less kissed. The exception was his old Aunt May, but that didn't count. Louise, delighted by his discomfort, giggled and kissed him again. It was impossible for Basil to form a clear thought. All right, young lady, the professor bellowed with a hearty laugh. I think our boy's had enough now. Tell us what happened. Perhaps we should start with introductions. Rathbone came out from the jungle trail. Indeed, the professor said, without a hint of surprise. Excuse my manners, Louise said, finally letting go of Basil. Professor McGuckin, I would like to introduce you to our friend Rathbone. The caretaker stepped forward and gave Louise that paternal look that reminded her that she was forgetting something. Oh, Louise said, slightly embarrassed. Forgive me, I mean President Rathbone. An honor to meet you, sir. The professor extended his hand. The honor is mine, Professor. I've heard a great deal about you. We have much to discuss. As they headed back to the volcano, Basil turned to Louise. Beatrice, what happened to Beatrice? An ear-piercing screech echoed down from the top of the volcano. She's fine. She's still pretty groggy from all the darts she took, but she'll be as good as new soon. So what happened here? Well, when the volcano monkeys saw that Von Rotweil was just a man and not a god, most of them began to question Lord Vex. Only a few of them ran. Rathbone and his rebels are in control now. It's lovely, isn't it? And Rathbone is president? The monkeys all wanted Rathbone to be their new king, but Rathbone's smarter than that. He wanted the power to be shared. He formed a democracy. All the monkeys vote now about everything. They are intelligent, aren't they? Basil said. Rathbone wants all the monkeys to learn the secrets of how the island works. That way, they can literally steer their own destiny. Louise and Basil reached the entrance to the engine room. It was filled with monkeys, all being schooled about island machinery. The caretaker was supervising. Everything was going well. The professor joined them at the entrance and looked out at the jungle. He frowned. "What is wrong, Professor?" Louise asked. "The shadows." Puzzled, McGuckin walked outside and stood motionless in the sunlight. He looked down at his feet. "Watch my shadow," he instructed. Basil and Louise watched in amazement. His shadow was slowly moving around in a clockwise direction. "What does that mean?" Basil asked. So when you stand still and you look at your shadow, it doesn't move. Eventually it moves if you stay there long enough, because the earth is moving around the sun and the earth is rotating on its axis. It looks like the sun is moving when really the earth is. So if you stand there for hours and hours and hours, your shadow will move. What's happening is that his shadow is moving around him very quickly. Something's not right. It means the island is moving in a circle. "Arthur!" the professor roared and rushed inside. "Yes, Professor!" the caretaker shouted back, trying to be heard over the loud machinery. "Full power astern!" The caretaker didn't hesitate. The island jerked forward. "Come quickly!" the professor ordered Basil and Louise. "Back to the submarine. We don't have much time." As Basil and Louise ran across the beach, the island began to tilt. They could barely keep their balance. Finally, they climbed the ladder and leaped into the submarine. The professor slammed the hatch shut. "Strap yourselves in, children," the professor directed. "We're going down fast." The roar of billions of bubbles obscured their vision. At lightning speed, the submarine descended down the tube connecting the lagoon to the ocean. Once they were back in the open water of the Atlantic, the blinding bubbles disappeared. At first, Basil and Louise didn't see anything but fish and debris swirling past them. "What's that?" Basil asked. I don't know. I can't make it out," Louise said. But as they got closer, their eyes widened. Basil stammered, It looks like a tornado." "No, it's a massive whirlpool," Louise cried, "and it's dragging Monkey Island toward its vortex. The island is going to be pulled down to the ocean floor. No one up there can survive this." The submarine was now heading away from the whirlpool. The professor pushed the craft to full power. Are we just going to leave them?" Basil asked, stricken. "Ah, of course not, dear boy." The professor merely laughed and gave him a wink. "Ha ha! Just think of this as a very important music lesson with a little Helios physics thrown in. Now, come up here. I need your help." Basil and Louise climbed to the control center. "Louise," the professor said sternly, "I want you to take the helm and keep the ship on course." Louise grabbed the wheel. She solemnly nodded. The professor pulled Basil to the starboard side of the helm. "When I give you the signal," the professor instructed, "pull this lever down fast, as hard as you can. Will you do that, dear boy?" Basil grabbed the lever and nodded. The professor then raced to the other side of the helm. "We'll be in position in a few seconds," he called over the roar of the engines. "Hold steady, Louise. Basil, wait for my order." The professor pointed the bow of the ship straight up, then stopped the propellers. The bottom of the submarine faced the whirlpool in the distance. "Ready, Basil?" Basil gulped. "Ready, sir." "On my mark, then." The professor lifted a small metal cover, exposing a large red button. There you go, big red button. He took a deep breath and slammed his hand on the button. "Now!" the professor thundered. A hatch opened on the bottom of the ship, exposing a cone-shaped device. The professor ramped the propellers up to full speed as Basil jerked the lever down with all his might. A sonic wave of musical notes from the ninth dimension boomed from the cone-shaped device. It began rocking the ship, and the painful sound made Basil cover his ears. Then a rush of bubbles exploded as Basil's lever released the ballast water. With the propellers spinning at full speed, the craft rocketed toward the surface. "Hold steady, Louise," the professor roared over the engines. The ship's hull rattled, straining to hold together under the staggering pressure. Faster and faster they shot upward, finally exploding clear out of the water like a breaching whale. They crashed back down with a thundering splat. Oops. Regaining their senses, Professor McCucken, Basil, and Louise found themselves safely aboard the ship, now bobbing gently in the water. It all seemed so calm. How did you do that? Basil asked. The professor was back at the helm, spinning the wheel rapidly. It's not over yet, he responded. I want both of you to get into your seats right now. The ship was moving again, but it felt different, and Basil could hear the rhythm of a tune he had heard before, but couldn't quite remember. He and Louise gave each other an identical, quizzical look. What's going on? Basil asked. That's always the question, isn't it? What's going on? I don't know, but look at that. Oh! Louise pointed at the large window in front of them. The ocean had been replaced by blue sky and some clouds. Then a seagull flew past the window. What on earth? Come on, let's get a better look, Louise said. What they saw beyond the console left them speechless. Well, wouldn't you have a hard time finding the words if this is what you saw? The ocean was 100 feet below. They were riding up on the tip of a massive wave, and they were headed directly at the whirlpool. In the distance, Monkey Island still skidded on the outer edges of the swirling water, continuing to spin toward the deadly vortex. At the same time, far off in the distance, something metallic reflected in the sunlight. Whoosh! The wave was now speeding faster and faster as it raced toward the whirlpool. Hang on, children, the professor cried. As the giant wave hit the edge of the whirlpool, it rose higher and higher and higher. Soon Basil and Louise were directly above the center of the swirling sea, looking straight down at the deep, dark hole. It's that sound again, Basil began, but he was silenced by what followed. The power of the spinning ocean sent the tidal wave crashing right down into the void. In seconds, 1,000,000 gallons of water poured into the whirlpool, bringing its energy to an immediate stop. As the wave came crashing down, McCucken's ship slid over the pounding surf and shot directly at Monkey Island. Slowing to a halt, the island bobbed in the last of the rolling waves. Professor McCucken's shoulders slumped in relief. He turned to Basil and Louise and gave them his wonderfully reassuring smile. You did it, Professor! You did it! The children leaped with joy. No, he answered quickly, we did it. Now, let's go to this island of yours and see if anyone is injured. Once again, the professor took his ship underwater and headed for the tube that led to the lagoon. When they stepped out onto dry land, they were met with celebration. The monkeys had all survived unharmed, and Lord Vex's followers had surrendered. All good things. Back in the volcano's engine room, the caretaker was drenched with sweat. Well done, old friend, the caretaker said softly. Well done. Ah, it's nothing you wouldn't have done, Arthur, the professor chuckled. Even with all of our scientific knowledge, it's amazing how little we really know, isn't it? Thank goodness for the power of music in the universe, eh? Then, being a humble man, the professor abruptly changed the subject. It appears we have some work ahead of us to get this island moving again. We do. The caretaker looked over at Basil and Louise, who were helping Rathbone repair a broken gear using Louise's flute. First, you have to get these two home. Ah, Louise can help you. I know her mother would agree. Her mathematics are exceptional. She cracked a 10th dimension code when she was 6, Arthur. Imagine. Think of what she could do on this island. The caretaker pointed to all the monkeys who were hard at work. They have to learn how to do this themselves. Besides, Louise is needed in Helios. The council needs her. We all do. With that, the professor sighed. Oh, I suppose you're right. Besides, I would miss her. It's nice to see her finally having a friend who understands her, isn't it? Splendid. He's not from Helios, but he could have been. I can hear it in his voice. Oh, yes. He's the one we've been looking for. The connection, you know, between his world and ours. But he doesn't see it yet. Does she? Ah, perhaps. She usually knows much more than I expect, Arthur. After all, she came to Monkey Island just in time, didn't she? The professor turned to Basil and Louise. Say your farewells now, children. It's time to leave. Louise hugged Rathbone. Are you going to be all right? Can you deal with Lord Vex? And shh. Rathbone held Louise's hands. First of all, he's not Lord Vex anymore. He's just an ordinary criminal. We'll be just fine. Rathbone then extended his hand to Basil. And thank you. The powerful monkey bowed to Basil. You are a true hero. Oh, no, Basil replied as his face quickly turned red. I'm no hero. I'm just... Ah, and that confirms it, dear boy, the professor interrupted with an infectious laugh. A genuine hero doesn't think his deeds are being heroic. Now it was Basil's turn to change the subject. No one is going to believe this, especially my mother back in Maine. Maine? The caretaker asked. Where in Maine are you from? Oh, it's just an ordinary place, Basil said with a shrug. I live in a lighthouse with my mother. Not the Pepperell Lighthouse? Why, yes, said Basil. You've heard of us? I'm Arthur Pepperell. Great Uncle Arthur? Oh, my mother will never, ever believe me now. Basil gave the caretaker a huge hug. See, they're related. Isn't that cool? So he's the uncle who disappeared. So apparently he went to Helios. Maybe in time she will. The caretaker's eyes sparkled. Who knows what the future may hold, especially in Helios. Basil, you will always be welcome here on Monkey Island. And I may surprise you and your mother with a visit to Maine. After we've gotten the island back up to speed, that is. Please come. Basil reluctantly pulled away. It was time to go. And that's it for chapter 8. So I'm going to have that uploaded today. You can enjoy it over the weekend. And we will be finishing this book on our next video and get ready to start a new story soon. So I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good day. Bye.